My name is Elena, and I'm 27 years old. The day I found out my brother sold my Rolex without asking is burned into my memory like a scar. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday gathering, family around the table, food filling every corner of the kitchen, the usual mix of chatter and noise. I was sipping water, trying to tune out the endless conversation about my brother's latest big idea, when he leaned back in his chair with that smug grin and said it like it was nothing. "Oh, by the way, I sold your Rolex. Needed a little seed money for my startup." Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're on the right side. Anyways, the room fell silent for half a second, just long enough for my stomach to drop. I blinked at him, certain I must have misheard. My Rolex? The watch I had bought with my own money, after years of long hours and saving? The one I cherished not because it was flashy, but because it represented something real. My independence, my hard work, my ability to give myself something no one could take credit for? I looked around, waiting for someone else to react. Surely my parents would step in. Surely someone would tell him this wasn't a joke. Instead, they laughed. My father gave a deep chuckle and shook his head like it was just boys being boys. My mother smirked and said, "Well, he's always been ambitious. That's your brother, chasing his dreams." Even my sister, who rolled her eyes at first, quickly joined in with a laugh as though this was just another family anecdote. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized they weren't horrified. They thought it was funny. They thought it was small. But to me, it wasn't small at all. That watch had been mine, earned, not gifted. I had worked double shifts, skipped luxuries, and saved until I could walk into the store and buy it for myself. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was proof that I could rely on myself, that I didn't need to beg for handouts or wait for approval. It was a milestone in my life, a reminder that I was capable of creating something valuable. And in a single sentence, he had stolen it, and they had erased its meaning with their laughter. I wanted to scream, to demand that they see how wrong this was, but I sat there in silence, staring down at my plate. My brother launched into a long explanation about his startup, how it was going to change everything, how someday we would all thank him for being so bold. My parents nodded along, as if his recklessness was brilliance, as if theft was just vision in disguise. That was the moment I realized it wasn't about the Rolex. It was about me. About the way they saw me. Or rather, the way they didn't. My brother could take from me, and they would still side with him. My work, my sacrifices, my achievements, they were invisible. And as much as it hurt, a small voice inside me whispered something I didn't yet fully understand. This betrayal wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. The Rolex wasn't just a watch to me. It was the first thing I ever bought that felt like more than an object. It was proof of what I could do on my own. Long before my brother decided it was nothing more than quick cash for his latest scheme, I had poured years of myself into earning it. Every hour of overtime, every sacrifice, every night I went without sleep was hidden inside that gold and steel. It wasn't about luxury. It was about freedom. I can still remember the years before I bought it. I was working a job that barely paid enough to cover rent, juggling bills and side gigs just to keep my head above water. I didn't have the cushion my brother enjoyed, the safety net of family loans and endless second chances. If I made a mistake, I paid for it. If I wanted something, I worked for it. And so I set a goal, one that seemed outrageous at the time. I would buy a Rolex. Not because I wanted to show off, but because I wanted a reminder that no matter how many times I was overlooked, I could create something valuable for myself. For months, I skipped nights out with friends, declined vacations I couldn't afford, and funneled every spare dollar into savings. I worked extra hours when no one else wanted the shifts. I took freelance projects, spent weekends grinding while my siblings partied. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. And maybe that was the point. This wasn't about them. It was about me proving to myself that I didn't need their validation to achieve something meaningful. The day I finally walked into the store, my hands were trembling. The clerk showed me different models, but the one I chose felt like it had been waiting for me all along. When he placed it in my hand, I felt the weight of it, not just the physical heft of the watch, but the weight of every sacrifice it took to get there. Signing that receipt, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was owning something that represented the future I was determined to build. I wore that watch sparingly, not because I didn't love it, but because I respected it. Every time I slid it onto my wrist, it reminded me of who I was becoming. It wasn't just about timekeeping. It was about marking the moment I stopped waiting for anyone else to hand me my worth. That Rolex was my milestone, a declaration in steel and gold that I could provide for myself in a world that constantly told me I couldn't. So when my brother bragged at the dinner table that he had sold it, my family thought I was upset over a piece of jewelry. They thought it was just about money. But it wasn't. He hadn't just sold a watch. He had taken something that carried years of my life inside it. And in that moment, their laughter told me everything. They had never seen its value, because they had never truly seen me. The Rolex incident didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the latest in a long line of moments that defined my brother's place in the family, and mine. His carelessness was nothing new, and neither was the way everyone bent over backwards to excuse it. For as long as I can remember, he was the golden child, the one who could mess up endlessly and still be called brilliant, while I was the one told to sit quietly, not make a scene, and be more understanding. When we were kids, it was little things. He'd take my toys without asking, break them, and leave them scattered in pieces on the floor. If I cried, I was told not to be dramatic. If I complained, my mother would sigh, "He didn't mean it, let him be." Meanwhile, I was expected to clean up the mess. I can still picture him smirking as I gathered up the shards, knowing that no one would ever hold him accountable. That pattern didn't fade with age, it only grew stronger. In high school, he barely scraped by, skipping classes and throwing himself into whatever obsession captured his attention that week. When he failed, my father laughed and said, "He's not cut out for textbooks, he's a dreamer." But when I brought home an A- instead of an A, I was met with disappointment. "You can do better," they'd remind me, as though my best effort still wasn't enough. His failures were painted as quirks, mine as proof I wasn't trying hard enough. By the time we were adults, the stakes were bigger, and so were the excuses. He borrowed money from me more than once, promising he'd pay it back, but he never did. I'd bring it up, and suddenly I was the selfish one, too focused on money, not supportive enough of his vision. He crashed his car after a reckless night out, and my parents swooped in to clean up the mess without hesitation. Yet when I bought my own car with years of savings, there was no congratulations, just silence, as though my achievements didn't exist unless they could compare them unfavorably. Every part of his entitlement was fed by their willingness to look the other way. He didn't need to learn responsibility, because responsibility was never required of him. And me? I became invisible in the process. My accomplishments were brushed aside, my boundaries ignored, my voice drowned out by the chorus of excuses they sang for him. So when he sold my Rolex, the reaction wasn't surprising. It fit perfectly into the pattern I had lived through my whole life. He took what wasn't his, shrugged, and waited for someone else to smooth it over. And they did, just like always, My anger wasn't acknowledged, my feelings weren't validated. Instead, they laughed, told me to stop overreacting, and praised him for having initiative. But what they didn't understand was that every dismissal, every smirk, every moment of being brushed aside had been shaping me in ways they couldn't see. The pattern of disrespect didn't just define him, it defined me too. Not as the weak one, not as the invisible one, but as the person who was learning, silently, to rise beyond the family that refused to see me at all. My brother has always been obsessed with the idea of being the next big entrepreneur. Ever since he was a teenager, he latched onto this fantasy of waking up one day with the million-dollar idea that would make him famous, admired, untouchable. It started small, sketches on napkins, scribbled business plans on school notebooks, but it never went away. Every month there was a new scheme. One week he wanted to launch a clothing line. The next he was certain he was going to disrupt the food delivery industry. He never finished anything, but he always talked as if he was one pitch away from changing the world. The problem wasn't that he dreamed big. The problem was that he never actually did the work. He'd get bored as soon as the grind began. Research, planning, the unglamorous effort of building a business from the ground up, that was beneath him. He wanted shortcuts, investors to hand him money, people to believe in him without him proving anything. And the family fed into it. They called him visionary. They told him he was destined for greatness. They convinced themselves his recklessness was brilliance. I can still hear my father telling him, "You're not meant for regular jobs. You're going to be your own boss." They said it with such pride, as if his inability to hold down a job longer than a few months was some sort of badge of genius. My mother defended him endlessly. "At least he's trying something," she'd say, as though half-baked ideas and constant failures were proof of courage. No one ever pointed out that trying and failing isn't the same as refusing to learn. Meanwhile, the rest of us were expected to admire him. My sister nodded along, pretending his wild ideas made sense. My parents emptied their wallets, covering debts and funding his whims. And when I dared to question him, to suggest maybe he should finish something before starting something new, I was painted as the negative one. "Don't crush his spirit," my father warned me once, as if asking for accountability was cruelty. The Rolex he sold for startup capital was just another chapter in that same story. He didn't see it as theft, because in his mind it was all for a greater cause. He talked about scaling and breaking into markets like he was already the CEO of a billion-dollar company, never acknowledging that he was standing on the backs of others. He believed so deeply in his own delusions that he couldn't see how destructive he was being. And the family played along again. They laughed about how bold he was. They told me I should be proud that my watch was part of his journey. No one saw what I saw, that his startup obsession wasn't about creating anything meaningful. It was about feeding his ego, maintaining the illusion that he was special, while the rest of us paid the price. He never noticed, but every time he spun another fantasy, my patience wore thinner. His dreams weren't dreams at all, they were excuses. And every excuse he made was another reminder that while he lived in illusions, I lived in reality. The dinner table was filled with the usual noise of clinking silverware and half-hearted conversation when my brother chose to announce what he'd done. He leaned back in his chair, casual as ever, and repeated it like a badge of honor. "I sold Elena's Rolex. That's how I got the seed money to launch the startup." He grinned at me as if I should be grateful, as if I should clap for him like everyone else always did. For a second, the room went quiet. I thought, maybe this time they'll see it for what it is. Maybe this time they'll finally stand up for me. but then the laughter started. My father's deep chuckle rolled out first, shaking his head like my brother was some harmless prankster. My mother gave a little smirk and said, "Well, family helps family. That's what matters." My sister laughed too, trying to smooth it over, telling me not to take it so personally. The sound of it all hit me harder than my brother's words had. I sat there frozen, my fork heavy in my hand, my heart pounding in my ears. How could they laugh? This wasn't some joke, it was theft. He had taken something precious to me, a piece of my history, and treated it like it was nothing more than a piggy bank for his next failure. And instead of outrage, instead of defending me, they turned it into entertainment at my expense. When I finally found the courage to speak, my voice was sharp. I said, "That watch was mine. You had no right." My brother waved me off with that same smug grin, saying, "Relax, sis. It's for something bigger than us. You should be proud you helped me start this." My father chimed in immediately. "Don't make such a fuss. It's just a watch. He's trying to do something with his life." My mother nodded along, adding, "Think of it as an investment in your brother's future." The humiliation burned in my chest. They weren't just excusing him. They were making me the problem for daring to be upset. My feelings, my boundaries, my sacrifices, all dismissed with a wave of laughter and condescension. I was overreacting, selfish, ungrateful. That was the message they gave me. All while my brother basked in their approval, proud of himself for taking something that wasn't his. I wanted to scream, to stand up and leave, but I forced myself to sit still. I clenched my hands under the table, nails biting into my palms, swallowing the storm of anger and grief. Their laughter echoed in my ears like a cruel chorus, louder than the clinking of glasses, louder than the scrape of plates. To them, it was all light-hearted. To me, it was betrayal made public, humiliation carved deeper than words could reach. That night, I understood something clearly. I would never be defended in this family. My brother could take whatever he wanted, and I would always be expected to smile through it. Their laughter wasn't just about the watch, it was about my place at that table. And for the first time, I realized I didn't want that place anymore. I sat there at the table that night, their laughter still ringing in my ears, and something inside me broke. Not in the way it had so many times before, when I would retreat quietly into myself and swallow the disrespect like bitter medicine. No, this was different. This time I felt something harden, something shift. I realized in that exact moment that I was done being the afterthought, the easy target, the family member whose feelings were always expendable. The Rolex was the spark, but it wasn't the cause. It was years in the making. Years of being told to quiet down while my brother's voice filled the room. Years of being told to be patient while he stumbled into failure after failure, cushioned by their endless support. Years of watching my achievements brushed aside as ordinary while his reckless dreams were celebrated as brilliance. I had tolerated it, convinced myself that maybe one day they would see me, that maybe if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, they would finally value me. But as I sat there, their laughter stinging worse than any insult, I knew the truth. They never would. The breaking point wasn't loud or dramatic. I didn't flip the table or scream. I didn't need to. It was a quiet shift in my chest, a decision carved so deeply into me it didn't require words. I was done waiting for validation. I was done playing the role of the overlooked sister, the one who had to accept scraps of acknowledgement while my brother took everything without consequence. That night, I went home and looked at the empty space where my watch had once been. For the first time, I didn't cry about it. Instead, I stared at that bare spot on my dresser and let it remind me of what I already knew. No one was going to hand me anything. Not respect, not recognition, not love. If I wanted to be seen, I would have to create a life so undeniable that their laughter could never touch it. The anger I felt hardened into something sharper, resolve. I thought about every time I had been silenced, every time I had been told I was overreacting, every time I had been made to feel small so that he could feel big. And I decided it ended with me. They could excuse him all they wanted, they could laugh at my expense, but I would not let them define me anymore. That dinner was supposed to humiliate me, but it did the opposite. It woke me up. My brother might have stolen a watch, but in doing so, he gave me something far more powerful. Clarity. I finally understood that my worth was not theirs to grant or withhold. It was mine to claim. And from that night on, I would no longer live as the forgotten one at the table. I would build a life that made their laughter irrelevant. After that night, I stopped wasting my energy trying to be seen. It wasn't a dramatic announcement, no slammed doors or bitter speeches. I simply withdrew, slowly and quietly, until the family stopped expecting my attention at all. Where I once tried to explain myself, I grew silent. Where I once gave them updates about my life, I offered nothing more than polite nods and half smiles. All the energy I used to spend seeking their approval, I began to pour into something else. Myself. The shift was almost invisible at first. I started by setting clear goals, the kind no one in my family had ever cared to ask me about. I wanted financial independence that couldn't be touched, recognition that didn't need applause, and a life that didn't depend on anyone's permission. I took on extra work, accepted opportunities that scared me, and taught myself everything I didn't yet know. While my brother was spinning new startup fantasies, waiting for someone else to fund his dreams, I was putting in the hours no one saw. Most nights, I worked long after everyone else had gone to bed. My desk lamp became my only companion, the quiet hum of my laptop, the soundtrack of my determination. I studied markets, learned how to invest, and said no to short-term comforts so I could build long-term security. My brother always demanded quick wins, but I learned patience. I understood that real success isn't loud. It's steady, disciplined, and built brick by brick. The silence became my strength. My family didn't ask what I was doing, and I didn't volunteer the information. At gatherings, they continued to laugh about my brother's latest big idea, while I kept my progress close to my chest. They thought my quiet meant I was fading further into the background, but the truth was the opposite. Every month, every year, I was becoming stronger, wealthier, freer. They had no idea. There were moments of struggle, of course. Deals that fell through, risks that didn't pay off, nights when I doubted myself. But the difference was, I never let those moments define me. I learned from every failure, adjusted, and tried again. Without their voices in my ear, telling me what I couldn't do, I found clarity. Without their constant comparisons, I found focus. The same silence they mistook for weakness became the foundation of my independence. As time passed, I built more than money. I built confidence. I built discipline. I built the kind of resilience that can't be shaken by a smirk across a dinner table. Every milestone I reached reminded me that I didn't need anyone to hand me an inheritance or validate my worth. I was creating my own. By the time my brother's startup ideas crumbled, and by the time my family's laughter lost its sting, I had already built something unshakable. They had no idea how far I'd come, because I never bragged, never explained, never sought recognition. I built in silence. And that silence became my power. Looking back, I realized that losing the Rolex was the best thing that could have happened to me. At the time, it felt like a slap in the face, a violation, a betrayal that cut deeper than I could explain. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to see it differently. The watch had been important, yes, but not for the reasons my brother or my family thought. To them, it was just a flashy piece of jewelry, something expensive that could be traded for cash. To me, it had been a symbol of my independence, my discipline, my ability to give myself something beautiful through sheer determination. And when it was stolen, I realized something even more important. The real value wasn't in the object. It was in the person who had earned it. That loss pushed me to see myself in a way I never had before. I stopped tying my worth to symbols, even meaningful ones, and began recognizing that the strength behind the Rolex was already in me. No one could take that away. My brother could sell the watch, he could brag about what he did with it, and my family could laugh at my expense. But none of them could erase the woman who had worked tirelessly to buy it. That lesson freed me in a way I never expected. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that wealth isn't defined by possessions. It's not about how loudly you can display your success or how many people know your name. Real wealth is quieter. It's the discipline to keep showing up, the patience to keep working even when no one is watching, the resilience to rise when others are waiting for you to fall. The Rolex had been a milestone, but it wasn't the destination. Losing it forced me to look inward and realize that the habits, the sacrifices, and the mindset I had built were the true treasures. I became more intentional after that. Instead of chasing the outward appearance of success, I focused on the foundation of it. I saved more. I invested smarter. I worked not for recognition, but for stability and freedom. Every choice became less about proving something to my family and more about building a life that was entirely my own. The Rolex had once been proof that I could achieve. Now, I no longer needed proof. I had certainty. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes from losing something you once thought defined you. You realize you don't need it as much as you believed. You realize you are stronger without it. My brother thought he had taken something from me, but in truth, he had given me the greatest catalyst I could ask for. He had forced me to see that I was worth more than any watch, any inheritance, any fleeting symbol of approval. The Rolex was gone, but the lessons it left behind became the foundation of the wealth I would carry for the rest of my life. Wanto, in the silence I had carved out for myself, something remarkable began to grow. While my brother was bouncing from one failed idea to the next, I was quietly laying the foundation of something real. At first, it was small, just a side project, a modest investment, a new skill I forced myself to learn late at night when everyone else was asleep. But over time, those small seeds began to take root. What started as survival slowly became strategy, and strategy became growth. Without anyone noticing, I was building my own empire. I didn't talk about it. I didn't brag or broadcast every step on social media the way my brother did with his startups. He wanted attention more than results. I wanted results more than attention. I studied, I worked, and I saved. I took calculated risks, not reckless gambles. Every dollar I earned, I treated with respect. I learned how to make money work for me, instead of letting it slip through my fingers the way he always did. It wasn't glamorous in the beginning. While he was pitching grand ideas to anyone who would listen, I was poring over spreadsheets, reading contracts line by line, and saying no to temptations that would have set me back. I taught myself how to invest, how to identify opportunities others overlooked, how to stay patient when the payoff wasn't immediate. I didn't chase shortcuts, I chased substance. And slowly, the numbers began to rise. The first time one of my ventures took off, I remember sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the proof on my laptop screen. My heart raced, not from the money itself, but from the validation of my own discipline. All those nights of silence, all those years of being dismissed, were beginning to crystallize into something undeniable. I had created this, not my parents, not my brother, not anyone else, just me. From there, it grew. One successful move gave me the foundation to make the next, and the next after that. I reinvested wisely, expanded carefully, and never let greed cloud my judgment. My brother burned through investors' money chasing flashy dreams. I quietly built real businesses that provided value, stability, and growth. He was constantly scrambling to recover from failure. I was steadily moving upward, brick by brick. The day I realized my net worth had surpassed his was surreal. For so long, he had been painted as the big shot, the one destined for greatness, while I was brushed aside. Yet here I was, wealthier than he had ever been, freer than he could ever imagine. And I didn't stop there. By the time he was drowning in debt and excuses, I had multiplied what I started with tenfold. What I built wasn't just financial, it was freedom. Freedom from their control, from their laughter, from their dismissals. My empire wasn't about proving anything to them anymore. It was about finally living on my own terms. Quietly, steadily, I had done what they never believed I could. And now, nothing and no one could take it away. It didn't happen all at once, though looking back it feels like the ending was written from the very beginning. My brother's startup, the grand venture he sold my Rolex to fund, started to unravel just like every other scheme before it. At first, he carried himself with that same inflated confidence, throwing around buzzwords and promising everyone that the breakthrough was right around the corner. He posted flashy updates online, bragged at family gatherings, and acted as if he was already sitting at the helm of the next big thing. But behind the curtain, the cracks were spreading fast. Deadlines slipped. Promises to investors fell flat. His so-called team quit one by one, tired of chasing his half-baked vision. The product he bragged about never fully worked, and when he was asked tough questions, he dodged them with empty charisma. I watched it all quietly, knowing how this story always ended, but this time was different. This time, he had stolen something from me to keep the fantasy alive. When the collapse finally came, it was brutal. He owed money he didn't have, and investors who once smiled politely at his pitches were now demanding answers. The startup closed its doors as quickly as it had opened them, leaving him with nothing but debt and excuses. And that's when the spiral began. He blamed the market, his partners, the timing, anyone and anything but himself. He told anyone who would listen that he'd been sabotaged, that greatness had slipped just out of his reach. But no matter how many stories he spun, the truth was undeniable. He had failed. For the first time, the family didn't laugh. Their voices grew quieter, their defenses weaker. My father, who once called him a visionary, now avoided the topic altogether. My mother, who had always excused his recklessness as ambition, sighed heavily whenever his name came up. Even my sister stopped covering for him, her forced smiles giving way to silence. The same people who once celebrated his recklessness as brilliance were left speechless in the face of his collapse. I should have felt vindicated. Part of me wanted to shout, "This is what I've been telling you all along." But I didn't. I didn't need to. The silence in the room whenever his name was mentioned was louder than any words I could have spoken. For once, they couldn't ignore reality. They couldn't excuse him, couldn't brush it aside, couldn't laugh it off as just another quirk of his character. His failure sat in front of them like an undeniable fact. And me? I stayed quiet, just as I always had. Only now, the difference was clear. I wasn't quiet because I was overlooked. I was quiet because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had built my own empire while he was burning through illusions. His downfall wasn't my victory, but it was proof of something I had known all along. Excuses collapse, but discipline lasts. And while he spiraled, I stood steady. The shift didn't happen in a single conversation. It was gradual, like a slow unraveling of the story my family had told themselves for years. For so long, my brother had been the shining star, the one they all rallied behind, the one they defended no matter how many times he stumbled. And me? I was the background character, the responsible but invisible one, the one who never seemed to matter as much. But the day came when even they couldn't pretend anymore. It started at another family dinner. The air was different this time, quieter, heavier. My brother sat slouched at the table, his usual cocky grin replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. He tried to fill the silence with small talk, but the sparkle was gone. The startup had collapsed, the debts had piled up, and his excuses were running out of power. My father, once his loudest cheerleader, avoided his gaze. My mother busied herself with the dishes, her laughter forced, brittle. My sister, who used to cover for him with half-hearted jokes, kept her eyes down, offering nothing. For the first time, their faces didn't match the words they spoke. My father muttered something about rough timing and the market being unpredictable, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. My mother reminded him that, at least he tried, but her voice was thin, almost embarrassed. And in the spaces between those hollow defenses, I caught the looks, the flickers of unease, the quiet acknowledgement that the golden sun they had placed all their faith in was no longer golden at all. It was then that their eyes began to turn toward me. Subtly, at first, almost by accident. They asked polite questions about my work, about how things were going for me. Questions they had never cared to ask before. When I gave simple answers, not revealing the full scale of what I had built, I saw their expressions shift again. My father raised an eyebrow, my mother nodded a little too slowly, and my sister looked at me with something unfamiliar in her eyes, curiosity, maybe even envy. They didn't know the details yet. They didn't know that I had surpassed my brother, that my quiet discipline had created wealth and freedom far beyond anything he had imagined. But they sensed it. They could feel it in the way I carried myself now, calm, steady, unshaken by their dismissals. They noticed the difference, even if they couldn't name it. For the first time, I wasn't the afterthought. I was the one in the room who didn't need excuses, didn't need validation, didn't need their approval. Watching their faces change was surreal. The family who had laughed at me, who had brushed me aside, was beginning to realize the truth they had ignored for so long. Their golden son had nothing to show but failure and debt, while the daughter they overlooked had quietly surpassed them all. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to explain. Their silence told me everything. They finally saw me. For a long time, I thought worth was something fragile, something measured in what you could show others. A shiny watch on your wrist? A job title you could casually drop into conversation, or the kind of approval that made people nod with respect. But the more I lived and the more I lost, the clearer it became that real worth isn't any of those things. A Rolex can be stolen. A business pitch can collapse. Approval can vanish the moment you stop living up to someone else's script. True worth, I learned, is built from the inside out. Losing that watch taught me more than owning it ever did. When I first bought it, it represented everything I had fought for. Independence, discipline, proof that I could achieve something on my own. But once it was taken, I had to ask myself what remained. What couldn't be stolen? The answer was simple: my resilience, my ability to get back up every time life tried to push me down. That was my real inheritance, one I gave myself. I started to see how hollow my brother's path had always been. His idea of worth was tied to appearances, the right pitch deck, the illusion of success, the applause of people who didn't look too closely. But when the curtain fell, he had nothing left to stand on. His worth crumbled because it had been built on sand. Mine, on the other hand, had been forged in silence, in nights of hard work, in sacrifices no one applauded. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Independence became the measure I cared about most. To be able to stand on my own, to know that my survival didn't depend on my family's approval or anyone else's handouts, that was freedom. To me, worth meant being able to make choices without fear, to walk away from toxic laughter at a dinner table and know I would still be okay. It meant not begging for space, but creating it myself. I also realized that value isn't just about money. It's about the ability to create, to build something lasting, to contribute in a way that no one can erase. My wealth wasn't just in numbers. It was in the skills I had developed, the discipline I had trained into myself, the perspective I had gained from every setback. That kind of value isn't flashy, but it's unshakable. It can't be stolen, can't be mocked, can't be dismissed. So when I think of worth now, I don't think of watches or startup dreams. I think of resilience, the kind that keeps you moving when others laugh. I think of independence, the kind that lets you rise without permission. And I think of value, the kind you build from the inside, brick by brick, until nothing and no one can take it away. That is the worth I carry. And unlike everything my brother ever chased, it's the kind that lasts. Revenge didn't come in the form of shouting or grand displays. It wasn't about walking into a room dripping with proof of my success, demanding everyone acknowledge what I had built. The sweetest part was that I didn't need any of that. The quiet truth was enough. I had created a life that couldn't be touched, one they could neither laugh away nor steal from me. And the Rolex, the very thing my brother had pawned off without hesitation, had become nothing more than the spark that lit the fire under me. I didn't need to get it back. In fact, I stopped thinking about the watch altogether. What mattered was what came after, the discipline it forced me to strengthen, the independence it pushed me to claim, the clarity it gave me about who I was and what I was capable of. My brother thought he had stripped me of something precious. What he never realized was that he had given me the final reason to stop seeking anything from him or from the family that enabled him. The irony of it all still makes me smile. He believed he was bold, clever, even heroic for funding his so-called dream with my sacrifice. Yet where did it lead him? To failure, debt, and silence. And where did it lead me? To freedom, stability, and a life of my own choosing. He thought he had taken from me. But in the end, I was the one who gained everything. That is the kind of revenge no one can argue with. I don't flaunt it. When the family gathers now, I don't walk in with numbers, possessions, or bragging rights. I don't need to. They see it in my composure, in the way I carry myself, in the calm that comes from knowing I built something real, while their golden boy built nothing but illusions. Their faces have changed, their tone has shifted, but I don't live for that anymore. Their recognition is irrelevant. My life speaks louder than their words ever could. The quiet revenge isn't about humiliating them. It's about no longer being humiliated myself. It's the moment I realized that I didn't need to prove anything, because I had already won. I had risen in the shadows, out of sight, building brick by brick while they laughed at me. And now the laughter has died down, not because I silenced them, but because reality did. So when I think about that Rolex, I don't feel bitterness anymore. I feel gratitude. It was never about the watch itself. It was about the fire it started, the transformation it forced, the independence it demanded of me. My brother sold it for a fleeting dream that collapsed. I used its loss to build an empire, and that, to me, is the only revenge that matters. Quiet, steady, undeniable. The kind no one can take away. Did you enjoy the story? If so, please let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe to support us. Thanks for watching.